Hi folks, welcome back to LAB, and yep, you've guessed it, another Corona video. I promise it's not going to be like this for the next 3 months or however long this goes on for, but there's so much interesting topical stuff that's coming out of this for the legal profession that I really wanted to address some of it with you before we move on to something happier, hopefully next week. Before we launch into the main body of today's video, I do just want to remind you of a couple of things. First thing is we've got a really special guest on tomorrow's LAB Live Lounge, which is Chung. I'm so excited about that. Last week we had Theodora Hand, who is a junior barrister at St Philip's, and tomorrow we've got Gordon, who most of you probably already know because he's a massive LinkedIn guru. He's a future trainee at Baker McKenzie and is very famous for his amazing contributions on LinkedIn and YouTube as well, actually, for aspiring lawyers. So please tune in tomorrow. As I mentioned before, I cannot put them on YouTube, the formatting just doesn't work. So please follow me on Instagram and tune in tomorrow at the slightly earlier time of midday. I've got speakers lined up every Monday for the next 6 weeks, so please follow me on Instagram so you don't miss out on that awesome content. Second thing, as I mentioned last week, I've increased my offering for one-to-one tuition and mentoring. So if you are in need of one-to-one careers advice, application help, CV reviewing, mock interviewing, whatever it is, then please drop me an email and I'd love to have you. Okay, so on to the main part of today's video. There are loads and loads of potential consequences of COVID-19 on the legal profession, and I'd be here for days if I went through them all, so I'm not going to go through them all. I am instead going to link an article from one of my favourite people, who is Mark Cohen, who you might remember from this video. He's basically the don of everything legal innovation and legal market. He has a column in Forbes, which he writes for nearly every week, and he produces really good content. So I've linked his article in the description so you can have a look at what he's got to say about this. The one that I want to talk about today, he's touched on, and this is the potential for the online court system. As you know, if you followed my diaries last week and have followed the news generally, that most hearings are now taking place virtually, either by phone or by video link or some kind of digital mechanism, which is something that has been talked about for a while but just never put in place for whatever reason. Basically, they said they couldn't do it. But we've now obviously been thrust into this situation where we've had to go digital, and now everything pretty much is digital. And this is something which obviously impacts me quite a lot as a civil litigator. As you know, I'm a personal injury lawyer, and I'm in court regularly representing people who've been catastrophically injured. So a lot of my day-to-day lawyering life revolves around being in court. So this is a really interesting phenomenon for me, that I'm now not going to have to go to court potentially. And I'm really interested in whether this remains the case or not post-corona, shall we say. Now, another one of my favourite people in law, Richard Susskind, who you will know from various other videos that I've done, in particular his really famous book, Tomorrow's Lawyers, which is the Bible, and every junior lawyer should read it. He has recently produced another book called The Online Courts and the Future of Justice, and I have to confess I have not yet read it, but I'm going to, and I'm really excited about it, and I may well do an update for this video once I've read it. The potential for online courts has thrown up a lot of discussion about the benefits and drawbacks of that, and I just wanted to talk about some of them today, actually. I mean, this is kind of more of a discussion really, because I don't know whether it's right or wrong that we should move digitally, but there are definitely pros and cons for and against, and this is something that might be interesting for you to talk about in an essay, on an application form, doing a journal article, or just writing something for LinkedIn. First thing is costs. Now, in civil litigation, there is a real focus around keeping costs down, and the courts have really strict rules about how many costs you're allowed to incur and what you're allowed to recover from the opposition in the event that you win your claim. So there's a real heavy focus on minimising costs as much as possible. And just to put it into context, a lot of my cases are issued out of London, although I'm based in Birmingham. So each time I have a hearing, which can be 3 or 4 times on average on any particular case, I have to go to London for that hearing. Now, to give you an idea as to how much that costs, my train fare to London is around £200, and then I also have to charge for my time in travelling to and from London at my hourly rate, which is around £300 an hour. So just travelling to court for those hearings is the best part of £1,500 each time I have to go. So say that happens 4 times, that's £6,000 just literally in me travelling to court. So you can imagine how that instantly cuts costs straight away if we have the hearings virtually, and it's difficult to justify how the courts could demand that we have hearings in person when it saves exponential costs by having them digitally. And in fact, a knock-on effect of that is creating access to justice, because there are circumstances where you apply for something, for example, you apply to rely on an expert, and the court will tell you, no, you can't have that expert, it's too expensive. But then on the flip side, they're making you travel from Birmingham to London to have the hearing to decide that issue to the tune of £1,500. So now that we've established that we can have hearings virtually and remotely, it seems like we almost have to going forward, or it completely flies in the face of minimising costs. So I think from that point of view, I'm absolutely in favour of having remote hearings, because from my point of view, it saves cost, which facilitates better access to justice for my clients, and it means potentially I can spend that money on things which actually benefit my client, like getting an expert report. However, there are a couple of other issues to consider here, and secondly is kind of more a point of principle really, and it's how the kind of traditional aspect of the legal profession will be affected by going digital. And I was thinking about whether barristers would have to continue to wear wigs and robes if they're essentially practicing from their study at home. Would they still have to wear a wig and a robe to address a virtual or a judge virtually? I don't know. And if not, does that have an impact on how the profession is seen? I think one of the appeals of the legal profession, if I'm being totally honest, was all of that. And every time I go to the RCJ, which is quite regularly actually, I feel like that's what I did this for. I look inside that building and I walk into court, and that buzz has not worn off in 7 years, and I don't think it ever will. And I wonder whether some of the tradition will be lost if everything goes digital, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It could be a bad thing, because then it loses some of its kind of eliteness, if you like, and some of the things that attract people to it. But on the flip side of that, I think maybe that's better for diversity and inclusion, because historically, particularly at the bar, there's this kind of concept of you having to look and sound a certain way in order to address a judge in court. And actually, if that whole process changes, then perhaps that does open it up and make it a little bit more accessible and diverse if you take that element away, which can only be a good thing from my point of view, as I've never agreed with that in the first place. And then you've got this other issue, which I thought about, whether judges are able to properly assess credibility of witnesses if this is done virtually. Because one of the major factors at trial or at any hearing is how your witness comes across in the box. Cases are won and lost by how witnesses come across, and similarly how barristers come across as well. And I wonder if the fact that there may not be this kind of human interaction element could potentially change the course of things in the court process. And again, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, because, I mean, it strikes me that that's probably a good thing, because it takes the element of kind of unconscious bias out of it, or conscious bias out of it, if actually all a judge is faced with is the cold hard facts, rather than any kind of human interference element. But these are just some of the things that I thought of. Again, this is kind of a bit of a weird video, because I'm not really giving you answers, I'm giving you topics to explore in your own time, which may well be of interest to you if you are thinking about making any application for training contracts that ask you to talk about certain issues, topical issues, whether you're going to write a post on LinkedIn, whether it's something to talk about as an interview topic. So these are just some of the things which I thought about as a potential consequence of COVID-19 and the online courts. Happy to discuss this more with you, and if you are interested in this, I strongly recommend that you read Richard Suskind's book, because although I haven't read it yet, I know it's going to be amazing if his previous book is anything to go by. So sorry this has been a bit of an odd video, but hopefully it's given you some food for thought. And as you know, I post relentlessly on LinkedIn and Twitter about stuff like this, so keep an eye on my socials if you're interested in hearing more about the developments in this arena. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, because now my mind started going off on a tangent about other thoughts, which I may put in a later video. But I hope this has been somewhat helpful, and I'll be back again next week, hopefully with something a bit different than coronavirus. See you later, guys.